The corridors of the alien palace were silent, save for the faint hum of energy fields lining the walls. Kale Ren moved cautiously, his human senses straining against the grandeur of the structure. Every corner shimmered with alien geometry, twisting and impossible to the human eye, yet elegant in ways that stirred both fear and fascination. This was supposed to be a restricted area, off-limits to any outsider, but curiosity had its own gravity, and Kale's boots carried him deeper into the labyrinthine halls. A flicker of light caught his attention, a pattern etched into the floor, faintly glowing with an unfamiliar energy. His instincts screamed caution, but something in the architecture whispered a forbidden allure. He traced the glowing symbols with a fingertip, feeling a hum that resonated through his bones. This was no ordinary chamber. Whoever, or whatever, resided here demanded reverence. Then the air shifted. It was subtle at first, a change in the weight of the silence, a ripple across the energy fields. Kale froze, realizing that he was no longer alone, and then he saw her. Queen Solara stood at the end of the corridor, her presence commanding every molecule of the room. Even from a distance, Kale could see the regal sweep of her form, the way her stance radiated authority, danger, and an almost hypnotic allure. Her skin shimmered faintly, catching the ambient light like a living jewel. Eyes amethyst and impossibly bright, locked onto him with an intensity that made his heart pound. Kale's mouth went dry. He had prepared for hostile encounters, alien aggression, or formal negotiations, but nothing had prepared him for this. She was more than a queen, she was a force of nature. Every instinct in his body screamed retreat, but his legs betrayed him, rooted to the spot by awe. "I shouldn't be here," he thought, a pulse of panic rising. "But I can't look away." Solara's gaze did not waver. There was no anger, not at first, only observation. She tilted her head slightly, a subtle gesture of curiosity rather than accusation. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken power and tension. Kale felt it like electricity running along his skin. Every fiber of his human being knew he was dangerously exposed. The corridor seemed to contract around him, shadows deepening, light twisting, emphasizing her presence. Her attire was ceremonial, alien fabrics folding in impossible angles, revealing glimpses of form and strength that made Kale's rational mind fight with instinctual desire. Yet the queen's beauty was not merely physical. It was the kind of presence that made one question hierarchy, dominance, and even mortality. She was the apex of her species, and here he was, small, fragile human, yet undeniably intruding. His fingers flexed nervously at his sides. He considered speaking, but every word seemed trivial in the gravity of her scrutiny. Solara moved a fraction, and the motion carried authority without aggression, elegance without compromise. Her eyes seemed to weigh his soul, reading him in ways no human had ever dared attempt. Kale forced himself to breathe, to maintain some semblance of composure. He reminded himself of protocols, of mission objectives, of the countless scenarios in which a human diplomat or explorer might survive an alien encounter. But nothing had accounted for a queen whose very presence could command attention and bend wills without a single word. And then she stepped closer, not aggressively, not in anger, but in deliberate, measured grace. The soft hum of her energy signature brushed against his senses, and Kale felt an almost magnetic pull toward her. Every step she took was a challenge, a silent question. "Why are you here, human?" Kale's mind raced. Was he about to be executed for trespassing, detained? Or was there another game being played, one that transcended language, culture, or even life itself? He could not guess, and yet he could not resist the desire to understand her, to see what lay behind those eyes that had already stripped away his pretenses. The final few feet closed between them, and Kale's breath caught audibly. He looked into her eyes, and in that instant he realized something terrifying and exhilarating. He had become the focus of the most powerful being he had ever encountered. His role as an explorer, as a human in this alien palace, had shifted. He was no longer merely observing. He was being observed, and the stakes were impossibly higher than any mission briefing had suggested. Solara paused just out of reach, a faint curve of a smile playing at her lips, not mocking, not welcoming, but something in between. It was an invitation and a warning all at once. Kale's pulse raced, and for the first time in his life, he understood the weight of awe, fear, and attraction converging into a singular, inescapable moment. And then, almost imperceptibly, she spoke. Not words yet, just a soundless acknowledgement of his presence, enough to ensure he knew he had been seen. Kale's heart thundered. The forbidden chamber was no longer just a place, it had become a crucible. And at the center of it stood Queen Selara, regal, dangerous, and utterly enthralling. The night, the palace, and perhaps the galaxy itself had shifted, and Kale knew one immutable truth. Nothing would ever be the same after this encounter. Kale Ren's mind raced, each heartbeat hammering like a drum against his ribcage. Queen Selara stood mere feet away, her presence so overwhelming that the air itself seemed to bend around her. The human protocols he had memorized, the careful procedures, the diplomatic etiquette, faded into nothingness. Nothing mattered except the pull of her gaze, the silent assertion of her power. Then she spoke. Her voice was a melody of command and allure, deeper than any human vocal register, resonating through Kale's chest like a low hum of energy. "Tonight, you will sleep in my chamber." The words hit him like a shockwave. Kale staggered backwards slightly, disbelief frozen across his features. Sleep in her chamber. With her. The idea was absurd, impossible, and yet delivered with such absolute authority that it left no room for debate. Kale swallowed hard, trying to force words past the sudden dryness of his throat. Ka. His voice faltered under the weight of her presence. Every instinct screamed retreat, yet he was rooted, paralyzed by awe and curiosity. Selara did not flinch. Her amethyst eyes bore into him, unyielding. She tilted her head, a subtle gesture that conveyed both amusement and expectation. "You misunderstand," she said softly, but her tone left no ambiguity. "This is not a request, human. It is a command." The corridor, once grand and intimidating, now felt impossibly small, a chamber defined entirely by her dominance and his exposure. Kale's mind spun. Across the galaxy, humans had encountered alien queens before, political figures, rulers of vast empires, but none had ever wielded authority in such a tangible, electrifying way. None had commanded not just obedience, but attention, instinct, and desire all at once. His hands clenched at his sides. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular," he stammered, but even as he spoke, a small, involuntary shiver ran through him. Every word seemed futile against the gravity of her presence. She was a force, and he was merely matter drawn into her orbit. Selara stepped closer, the faint shimmer of her ceremonial attire reflecting off the glowing walls, the motion fluid, predatory, and impossibly elegant. Her movement was not threatening, but it carried intent, subtle and unyielding. She invaded his personal space without aggression, a predator testing the resolve of its prey. "You hesitate," she observed, her tone both curious and commanding. "Do you not understand the consequences of refusal?" Kale swallowed again, his throat dry. He did understand. In Selara's presence, hesitation could be fatal, disrespect could be lethal. Yet fear alone did not explain the strange, magnetic pull he felt. There was a dangerous allure to her command, a combination of raw authority and something unspoken, intimate. He took a shaky step forward, compelled despite himself. I would obey," he admitted, voice low, barely audible. The words felt alien on his tongue, almost sacrilegious, yet necessary. Saying them aloud did not diminish the charge of tension, it intensified it. Selara's lips curved faintly, just enough to suggest approval or perhaps amusement. "Good," she said, her voice a low vibration that resonated in his chest. "Do not mistake this for leniency. Tonight you will learn the weight of obedience and the gravity of proximity." Kale's pulse surged. Proximity. The word carried implications he could not entirely process. His rational mind struggled, juggling duty, survival, and an inexplicable, growing fascination. He realized, with a mixture of panic and thrill, that he was not merely following an order. He was being tested, drawn into a dynamic far beyond human understanding. Selara extended a single hand, graceful yet commanding. The gesture was an invitation, a directive without explicit coercion. Kale's fingers twitched involuntarily. He wanted to step back, to retreat, but something stronger than fear held him in place. The pull of her authority, the intensity of her gaze, and the sheer audacity of her command had created an invisible tether. "Follow me," she said finally, each word deliberate, a slow cadence that made the air itself vibrate. "And remember, human, tonight there will be no misunderstandings. You will stay where I decree, and you will learn to obey." Kale nodded, his head a weight of confusion, awe, and adrenaline. He followed, each step measured, every nerve alert, acutely aware of the charged energy that surrounded the queen. The hallways seemed to shimmer and contract with each of her movements, the palace itself bending around her authority. And as he crossed the threshold toward her chamber, Kale realized something both terrifying and intoxicating. He was no longer a visitor. He had become part of her world, subject to rules and desires he had never imagined. And Selara, the alien queen, regal, dangerous, and achingly alluring, was in full control. The night had just begun. The chamber door slid shut behind Kale with a hiss that echoed faintly in the vast hall. A pulse of energy ran along its edges, sealing the room in a glow that felt both protective and suffocating. Kale paused, taking in the alien architecture, the shifting crystalline walls, the subtle hum of power that vibrated beneath the floor. It was magnificent, alien beyond comprehension, and utterly dominated by the presence of one being. Queen Selara. Selara stood near the far side, her posture flawless, every motion precise and deliberate. She did not approach immediately, choosing instead to observe him with the patience of a predator studying its prey. Kale could feel her gaze on him, not just seeing him, but weighing him, analyzing him, and perhaps enjoying his discomfort. His heart thudded painfully against his ribcage. Every instinct screamed caution, but his human curiosity and the strange, magnetic draw of her presence rooted him in place. She was a living force of power, elegance, and danger, and he, for all his training and confidence, felt small, exposed, human. Selara's eyes, bright and unyielding, tracked his movements. She tilted her head ever so slightly, a subtle gesture that made Kale's mind reel. It was as if she could anticipate every thought, every hesitation. And yet she allowed him to breathe, to exist in her space, testing the limits of his composure without overt confrontation. Kale's gaze drifted over the room, avoiding hers momentarily, taking in the alien symbols etched into the walls, the soft bioluminescence that pulsed like the heartbeat of the palace itself. But no matter where he looked, her presence loomed, an unshakable gravity that pulled his attention back to her. He tried to control his breathing to steady his racing pulse, but each inhale seemed heavy, laden with anticipation and something he dared not name. The queen spoke softly, almost casually, but the resonance of her voice vibrated through the chamber. "Do you understand why you are here, human?" Kale swallowed. His mind spun for an answer that would satisfy both reason and survival. I believe so, your majesty," he said, careful to keep his voice steady. "You summoned me here to your chamber." Selara's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. Not warm, not cruel, something in between. "Good. Understanding is the first step. Compliance will come later if you prove capable." Her words were a challenge, yet she offered no further guidance. Kale realized that every second in this room was a test. The silence itself was heavy, each pause deliberate, allowing the tension to build, making him acutely aware of the distance between them, and the magnetic pull of that distance. Kale's hands flexed at his sides, fighting against the subtle tremor that betrayed his inner turmoil. Every instinct told him to retreat, yet he found himself unable to move. He was drawn forward by something intangible. Respect, fear, fascination, perhaps even a flicker of something dangerously personal. Selara took a step, the motion fluid, predatory, and yet perfectly controlled. The chamber seemed to react with her, walls catching and refracting light in ways that emphasized her power, her form, her presence. The air itself seemed charged, electric, as though every molecule in the room recognized her dominance and his vulnerability. "You hesitate," she observed, her tone teasing but edged with command. "Are you uncertain, human, or are you merely learning the weight of my attention?" Kale's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. Instead, he swallowed hard, realizing the truth. He had never faced authority like this. Across countless missions, across innumerable alien species, he had never encountered a presence that could simultaneously inspire fear, awe, and something far more primal. Selara's gaze softened briefly, not enough to make him comfortable, but enough to make him acutely aware of the unspoken dialogue between them. No words were needed. Every glance, every subtle shift of her posture conveyed meaning, expectation, and silent power. Kale felt as if he were standing at the edge of a precipice, the chasm below both terrifying and magnetic. Time stretched. Seconds, minutes, Kale could not tell. The chamber's glow pulsed gently, echoing the rhythm of his heartbeat. Selara remained perfectly still, watching him, letting him feel the weight of her authority without overt assertion. Each moment of silence deepened his awareness of her, of the room, of the precariousness of his position. Finally, she spoke again, her voice lower this time, almost a whisper that seemed to bypass the ears and strike directly at his mind. "You will remain here tonight, and you will learn quickly that in my presence, hesitation is a luxury you cannot afford." Kale nodded, unable to trust his voice. His body was tense, every nerve alert, every sense heightened. He understood that survival, mental, emotional, even physical, depended on reading her intentions, understanding her expectations, and maintaining composure under scrutiny that was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. He took a small, cautious step toward her, guided by instinct more than reason. Salara's eyes flicked to him, and the faintest acknowledgement, a tilt of her head, a subtle lift of her chin, confirmed that he was walking the line correctly. The room seemed impossibly vast, yet entirely consumed by the dynamic between them. Predator and intrigued prey, queen and intruder, alien and human. Silence reigned, yet it was alive, pulsating with tension and unspoken possibilities. Kale realized, with a mix of fear and thrill, that the night ahead would be more than a test of obedience. It would be a test of endurance, courage, and understanding, in a chamber where words were unnecessary and presence was everything. He had entered her domain as an explorer, but already he knew he would leave it changed, bound by invisible forces stronger than any treaty or weapon, caught in the orbit of Queen Salara's formidable will. The chamber was quiet, yet the hum of energy fields seemed to grow louder in Kale's ears. He stood where Salara had left him, acutely aware of her presence, every pulse of light across the crystalline walls reflecting the tension that hung between them. Her gaze had followed him as he adjusted his stance, but now, strangely, it softened just slightly, an almost imperceptible shift that made his chest tighten. For a moment, Salara turned away, her silhouette framed by the glowing alien architecture. Kale noticed a brief flicker of something unexpected, hesitation. It was almost laughable in its subtlety, a fleeting imperfection in an otherwise flawless display of command. A human might have missed it entirely, but Kale had learned to watch, to observe nuances, survival instincts honed over countless explorations. "Why are you so?" he started, uncertain, his voice low. "So careful, even with me." Salara froze for a heartbeat, then let out a sound that was almost a laugh, soft, melodic, and human enough to startle him. It wasn't mockery, it wasn't disdain. It was amusement tinged with something fragile. "I have been watching humans for decades," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of experience and the hint of tiredness. "And yet, you are different." Kale's brow furrowed. Different how? His words were cautious, every syllable measured. Being in her presence was like standing in a storm. You felt the power of the wind and the threat of the lightning, but you also saw the rare moments of calm between strikes. Salara's eyes softened further, just enough that her danger seemed less absolute. "Most humans cling to survival or to reason or to protocol. You hesitate, but not from fear alone. You are aware, observant. You notice what others overlook. That is rare." Kale blinked. He hadn't expected praise. He hadn't expected anything human, anything approachable in this queen of an alien empire. And yet, hearing those words, he felt a strange mixture of relief and tension. Her compliment didn't reduce the danger she radiated. It enhanced it. He was aware now not only of her power, but also of her perception, her discernment. "You could trust me less," he ventured, cautious, almost teasing despite the adrenaline in his veins. "And still you're letting me stand here. That's unusual." Salara tilted her head, studying him. "Do not mistake my observation for trust," she said softly. "Trust is earned slowly, deliberately, but observation is necessary, and sometimes," she paused, her gaze distant for a moment, "it is lonely." The last word hung in the chamber like a whispered confession. Kale's pulse skipped. He had never heard an alien, least of all one as formidable as Salara, admit to something so human. Loneliness, vulnerability, a crack in the otherwise impenetrable armor of her authority. He felt a surge of empathy laced with fascination. This was the queen who could command fleets, who could bend a palace to her will, who had eyes capable of unraveling entire worlds. And yet here she was, revealing a fragment of what it meant to be, herself. "Lonely," Kale repeated, testing the word, tasting its weight. "Even for someone like you." Salara's lips curved faintly, a mixture of amusement and melancholy. "Even for someone like me, power is isolating, human. Authority demands distance, and yet curiosity persists, observation persists. Sometimes," her gaze met his, intense yet fragile, "the observer longs to be understood." Kale's chest tightened. Her words weren't just statements. They were an invitation, a glimpse into a side of her that few, if any, humans would ever see. And yet this vulnerability did not diminish her. It made her more commanding, more intriguing, more alive. He took a careful step forward, measuring the distance between them, aware of the charged energy of the room and of the subtle pull between them. "I don't fully understand your world," he admitted quietly. "But I want to. And he hesitated, swallowed. "I want to try to understand you." Solera's eyes studied him, unblinking, and for a moment, silence stretched like a taut wire between them. Then she inclined her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, a gesture that conveyed acknowledgement, curiosity, and perhaps permission. "Be cautious, human. Understanding comes at a cost. And yet, you may prove more resilient than I anticipated." Kale's pulse raced. He realized he had crossed a threshold, not physical, not yet, but emotional. The Queen's vulnerability had drawn him closer in a way that respect or fear never could. He was no longer merely an intruder or an observer. He had become a participant in a subtle, dangerous dance of power and awareness. The chamber seemed to shrink and expand at once, the walls glowing softly, the air charged with tension, anticipation, and a strange intimacy that defied the rules of species and protocol. Kale understood that he had stepped into a world where survival depended on perception, and perception was as much emotional as it was physical. And for the first time, he felt the weight of the night ahead, not just the challenge of obedience, not just the test of courage, but the challenge of truly being present, fully aware, in the orbit of someone who could inspire awe, fear, and fascination simultaneously. Solara's silhouette remained luminous at the far end of the chamber, regal and commanding, yet now touched by the delicate trace of humanity. Kale knew that whatever came next, he would never experience the galaxy, or himself, the same way again. The quiet hum of the chamber was shattered by a sudden, sharp alarm echoing through the palace corridors. Lights flared, casting long, jagged shadows across the crystalline walls. Kale's pulse jumped. He had not expected danger, not now, not here, not in the Queen's chamber, but instinct demanded immediate awareness. Solara's eyes narrowed, pupils dilating as she scanned the room. Her normally measured posture became taut, alert, every movement precise and commanding. The energy fields along the walls shifted in response to her presence, creating a protective lattice around her that shimmered with lethal potential. Yet despite her formidable defenses, Kale sensed an underlying tension, a rare admission that even she recognized the seriousness of the threat. "Human," she said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. "Prepare yourself. The palace defenses have been breached." Kale's training kicked in. He reached instinctively for his sidearm, but the chamber's alien technology rendered it useless. No human weapon could pierce the energy shielding. He cursed silently, but the panic was quickly replaced by focus. Retreat was not an option. Survival and the Queen's safety depended on improvisation. From the shadows of the corridor, shapes emerged. Intruders, sleek and alien, moving with silent precision. Kale could barely make out the glint of their weapons, alien constructs that seemed almost organic in design, writhing slightly as they moved. The palace had been infiltrated, and he was trapped inside with the most powerful being in this sector of the galaxy. Solara's attention never wavered. She gestured with a single hand, and a wall of pulsing energy sprang to life, cutting off one approach. Kale followed her lead, realizing that her commands were not verbal but visual, intuitive, a silent dialogue of strategy and survival. "You are faster than expected," she murmured, her voice a blend of surprise and admiration. "Keep close, human. Observe, learn." Kale felt the tension twist into adrenaline, a heady mix of fear and exhilaration. He followed her through narrow passages, ducking behind crystalline pillars as energy beams traced arcs dangerously close. Every movement required split-second decisions, each choice a test of reflex and composure. And yet, despite the chaos, Kale felt an odd sense of clarity. He was performing at the edge of his capabilities, aware of both danger and the Queen's silent guidance. One of the intruders breached a secondary gate, sliding toward Solara with lethal intent. Without hesitation, Kale lunged, using a combination of momentum and brute instinct to intercept. He grabbed the creature, twisting it off balance, and sent it crashing into the wall with a force that made him stagger. Solara's eyes flicked to him, a glimmer of approval sparking in her gaze. "Impressive. Your instincts not entirely human." The compliment, though brief, struck Kale with the force of a revelation. He had spent his life training, surviving, adapting, and here, in the Queen's presence, those skills were recognized, almost revered. His confidence surged, though he dared not show it entirely. Every sense was sharpened, every nerve firing. More intruders advanced, and Solara unleashed a torrent of controlled energy blasts, precise, devastating, and elegant. Kale mirrored her movements, ducking, weaving, using the environment to his advantage. He realized he was no longer simply following orders. He was anticipating them, moving in sync with her, their actions forming an unspoken, lethal choreography. At one point, Solara glanced at him just for a fraction of a second. The intensity of her gaze held more than command. It held respect, acknowledgement, and perhaps the faintest spark of something personal. Kale felt his pulse spike. Amidst the chaos of combat and survival, there was a connection forming, subtle but undeniable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the intruders was neutralized, their alien forms collapsing under the combined force of human improvisation and the Queen's power. The chamber and the palace fell silent again, save for the residual hum of energy and Kale's ragged breathing. Solara stood tall, unscathed, the picture of unyielding authority. Her gaze swept over Kale, measuring, assessing. Then slowly she inclined her head in acknowledgement. "You have done well, human, not just for yourself, but for me. That is notable." Kale's chest tightened. Praise from Solara was not easily given, and the subtle warmth in her tone, the faint recognition of his skill, ignited a mixture of pride, awe, and a dangerous curiosity. He realized that the night, which had begun with fear and obedience, was evolving into something far more complex. A tentative bond forged in danger, respect, and mutual recognition of capability. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he managed, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. I did what was necessary." Solara's lips curved faintly, a ghost of a smile, elegant and unreadable. "Indeed. Remember this lesson, human. Courage, composure, and instinct are not weaknesses, they are survival. And sometimes they earn the attention of those who rarely notice such things." Kale nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. He had not merely survived the night. He had proven himself, in a way he could scarcely articulate. And in doing so, he had inched closer to the enigmatic, awe-inspiring queen who had summoned him here, a human in her realm, learning the price and the thrill of her attention. The chamber settled into uneasy calm once more, but Kale knew the night was far from over. The threat had passed, yes, but the unspoken game, the intricate dance of power, tension, and attraction between human and queen had only just begun. Traction between human and queen had only just begun.